Zainab grew up in the dusty streets of Ibadan, where the sun always seemed to shine brighter on the rich side of town. Every morning, she watched women in fine clothes drive by in shiny cars, their laughter floating out of the windows. They looked so happy, so free. She often whispered to herself, "One day, I'll marry a man like that. I'll live that kind of life." Her mother, Mama Aisha, worked as a food seller near the market. Every day she came home tired, her hands smelling of smoke and pepper. She would look at her daughter and say softly, "My child, hard work brings peace. Do not look for easy things." But Zainab did not agree. To her, beauty and charm seemed like faster keys to success than sweat and struggle. She spent hours standing in front of an old mirror, practicing her smile, fixing her hair, and imagining herself in expensive clothes. At school, Zainab was bright but easily distracted. When her friends talked about exams, she daydreamed about parties and perfumes. She followed people on social media who showed off gold jewelry and big houses. "This is the life I want," she would think. Her friend, Mariam, often laughed and said, "Zainab, dreams without work are just stories." But Zainab only smiled. She believed her story would end differently. Years passed, and after finishing school, Zainab refused to take small jobs. She told her mother, "I was not born to sell food or clean offices. I want more." Her mother sighed. "Wanting more is not bad, my daughter. But you must take the right road to find it." Zainab didn't listen. She wanted to look like those rich women she admired. She saved small amounts of money to buy nice clothes and makeup. Every time she passed a mirror, she told herself, "I am special. My life will change soon." One evening, she went with Mariam to a wedding in the city. The place was beautiful, full of lights and music. Zainab felt like she had stepped into another world. Everyone looked important, wearing rich fabrics and gold watches. She moved carefully, greeting people politely, hoping to be noticed by someone wealthy. Then she saw him, a tall man in a white suit, surrounded by people who seemed to respect him. He had the calm confidence of someone used to success. When his eyes met hers, Zainab felt her heart skip. He walked over and introduced himself as Femi, a businessman from Lagos. His voice was deep and kind, and his smile was warm. That night, they talked for a long time. Femi asked her simple questions: where she studied, what she loved to do, what she wanted for her future. Zainab answered carefully, trying to sound educated and elegant. She told him she wanted to start her own business one day, though in truth she had no plan. Femi smiled and said, "You speak like a woman with dreams." After that night, Zainab couldn't stop thinking about him. He called her often, sent her flowers, and took her to fine restaurants. For the first time, she felt like she was living the life she always imagined. When she walked through her neighborhood, people stared in surprise. Even Mariam said, "You've changed, Zainab. Maybe your dream is coming true." But deep down, Zainab felt pressure. She knew Femi was rich and smart, and she didn't want him to see the real her, the girl from a poor home with worn-out shoes and an empty purse. She began to borrow money to buy expensive clothes and perfumes. "He must never think I am ordinary," she told herself. She smiled in pictures, pretending everything was perfect. Her mother began to worry. "My child," she said one evening, "I can see pride in your eyes. Remember, lies may dress well, but they walk with trouble." Zainab grew angry. "Mama, you don't understand. This is my chance. I can't let him see me as poor." Her mother said nothing more, only prayed silently. As months passed, Femi began to notice her strange behavior. Sometimes she avoided simple questions about her family. She always wanted to visit fancy places and hated staying home. But he liked her kindness and believed she would change with time. Zainab, however, was drowning in debt. The people she borrowed from started calling, demanding their money. She felt trapped. She thought, "Once Femi marries me, everything will be fine. I'll pay them all back." But fate had other plans. One afternoon, she was at Femi's office when two angry men arrived, shouting her name. They said she owed them a large sum. Femi was shocked. He asked, "Zainab, is this true?" She froze, tears filling her eyes. "I only wanted to fit into your world," she whispered. "I didn't mean to lie." I just wanted to be the kind of woman you could love." Femi looked at her for a long moment. His voice was calm but heavy. "Zainab," he said, "you wanted to be a millionaire's wife, but you forgot that love without truth cannot live." He paid her debt quietly, then walked away. That night, Zainab sat alone, her fine clothes lying on the floor. The dream she chased for so long had turned to dust. The next morning, she packed her things and returned home to her mother. For days, she cried and refused to eat. But Mama Aisha held her gently and said, "Failure is not your end. It is your teacher." Slowly, Zainab began to change. She started helping her mother at the food stall, learning how to cook and manage money. She began saving again, this time not for clothes, but to open her own small restaurant. The same people who once mocked her now came to buy her food. Years later, her business grew. Zainab bought her mother a new house and hired young women to work with her. She was no longer the girl chasing a rich man's love. She was a woman who built her own path. Whenever people asked about her past, she smiled softly and said, "All my effort to be a millionaire's wife came crashing because I forgot the richest thing a woman can own, self-respect." And from that day, Zainab never chased another man's dream again. She chased her own. The hall was filled with lights, laughter, and the sound of drums when Zainab walked into the wedding in Lagos. She wore a simple but beautiful blue dress that she had borrowed from a friend. Her heart beat fast as she looked around the grand place. Everything seemed so different from her small world: the smell of sweet perfume, the sparkle of gold jewelry, the laughter of people who looked like they had never known worry. Zainab felt both excited and nervous. She had dreamed of being among the rich for years, and now she was standing in their midst. She sat quietly at a corner, pretending to check her phone while her eyes moved across the crowd. She watched men in fine suits, women in flowing gowns, and waiters carrying trays of wine. For the first time, she felt close to her dream. Then her eyes caught someone, a tall man in a white suit, laughing softly with a group of people. He looked confident but not proud. His name was Femi, though she didn't know it yet. When he turned and their eyes met, she quickly looked away, her heart racing. But when she glanced back, he was still watching her with a small smile. A few minutes later, Femi walked toward her. "Good evening," he said politely. "You look beautiful tonight." Zainab smiled shyly and replied, "Thank you, sir." His voice was calm and warm. He asked her name, and when she said, "Zainab," he repeated it slowly, as if he liked the sound of it. They talked for a while, and Zainab learned that Femi was a businessman from Lagos, managing several companies. He spoke simply, without pride, and listened to her carefully. She told him she worked part-time while trying to plan her future. She did not mention her small life in Ibadan. Femi liked her smile, her confidence, and her gentle way of speaking. He had met many women who only cared about his money, but Zainab seemed different. She appeared calm and thoughtful. Zainab, however, was careful with every word. She didn't want to sound like the poor girl she truly was. Inside, her mind whispered, "This is the kind of man I prayed for." When the wedding ended, Femi asked for her number. Zainab could hardly believe it. She smiled politely, but inside she was dancing. That night, as she returned home, she replayed every moment in her mind. His voice, his smile, the way he said her name. She barely slept. She imagined herself beside him, living in a big house, wearing fine clothes and being called Madam. The next day, Femi called. His voice made her heart jump. He asked if they could meet for lunch. Zainab said yes, pretending to sound calm though her hands were shaking. She borrowed a nice handbag from Miriam and wore her best dress. At the restaurant, she saw him waiting at a table by the window. He stood up when she arrived, smiling warmly. "You look lovely," he said again. The waiter brought food, and they talked about many things: life, family, dreams. Zainab listened carefully, laughing at his jokes, nodding at his stories. Femi told her about his travels and his plans to open a new company. Zainab said little about herself, afraid he might lose interest if he knew her truth. Days turned into weeks, and Femi became a regular part of her life. He called every morning to check on her, sent small gifts, and sometimes visited her at work. Once, he surprised her with a new phone, saying, "You deserve good things, Zainab." She was touched. Every time she looked at him, she saw the life she always wanted: clean, calm, and full of comfort. But Femi was not only rich, he was kind. When they met, he would open doors for her, ask if she was hungry, and listen when she spoke. He didn't boast about his wealth or show off his cars. Zainab admired that. She often told herself, "He is not like other rich men." Her friends began to notice the change. Mariam teased her, saying, "Zainab, your face is always glowing. Are you sure it's not love?" Zainab laughed but said nothing. Deep down, she knew it was not love she felt, it was relief. For the first time, her dreams seemed close. Femi invited her to a family dinner one weekend. Zainab panicked at first. She didn't have fancy clothes, and she didn't know how to behave around rich people. But she couldn't say no. She spent the little money she had on a new dress and shoes. When she arrived at Femi's house, her breath caught. The mansion stood tall with shining lights and guards at the gate. She felt small, but Femi's smile gave her courage. His family welcomed her politely, though his mother looked at her with quiet curiosity. They talked and laughed, and Zainab tried her best to impress everyone. She avoided mistakes, smiled at the right times, and even complimented the food. Femi's father seemed to like her spirit, saying, "You have a bright face, young lady." After dinner, Femi walked her to her taxi. "You were wonderful tonight," he said. Zainab smiled shyly. "I was nervous," she admitted. "You didn't show it," he replied. As the car drove off, she looked out the window, her eyes wet with joy. She whispered, "Maybe this is really happening." In the following weeks, their bond grew stronger. Femi introduced her to some of his friends, who treated her with respect. They went on short trips, had dinners, and shared quiet evenings talking about life. Sometimes, when Zainab saw herself in the mirror wearing the new clothes he bought, she felt like a different person, someone important. But deep down, fear followed her. She knew she was living a lie. She hadn't told him that her mother still sold food in the market, or that she was drowning in debt from trying to look rich. Yet she kept telling herself, "I'll tell him one day, when he loves me more." Femi often looked at her with soft eyes and said things like, "You make my days lighter, Zainab." Those words made her heart swell with pride. She didn't know if she loved him or just loved the life he brought with him. Maybe both. One evening, after dinner at a seaside restaurant, Femi held her hand and said, "Zainab, I don't know where this will lead, but I feel something strong for you." Zainab smiled, pretending to be calm, but her heart was dancing wildly. "I feel the same," she whispered. That night, as she walked into her small room in Ibadan, she looked around at the cracked walls and broken chair. She smiled sadly and said, "Soon, this will all be behind me." She didn't know then that dreams built on lies have weak roots. For now, she was living her fairy tale, the poor girl who caught the millionaire's eyes, unaware of the storm quietly waiting ahead. Zainab's life began to change quickly after she started dating Femi. He was kind, respectful, and generous, and she didn't want to lose him. But deep inside, she felt a growing fear, the fear of not being good enough for his world. Every time she visited his home or met his friends, she noticed how different she was from them. They wore designer clothes, spoke polished English, and carried themselves with quiet confidence. She told herself, "I must look like them. I must fit in." To keep up, Zainab began to borrow money. At first, it was for small things, a new handbag here, a nice pair of shoes there. But soon, she wanted more. She started visiting expensive boutiques, buying clothes she could never afford. Each time she dressed up to meet Femi, she felt powerful, like a woman from the world she always dreamed of. But when she got home, reality hit her hard: the bills, the debts, and the endless worry about how she would repay them. She told her friends she was doing fine, that business was going well, but in truth, she had no business. She was living on borrowed money and borrowed time. When Mariam, her best friend, tried to warn her, she only laughed and said, "You don't understand. This is my chance. If I lose him, I lose everything." Femi noticed her new look. One day he said, "You're glowing, Zainab. You've changed your style." She smiled and replied, "A woman should always look her best." He nodded but looked at her carefully. There was something different about her, something restless in her eyes. Zainab's lies grew with each passing week. She told Femi that her father was a trader who lived abroad, and that her family owned land in another city. She even showed him pictures of big houses she found online, pretending they were hers. Femi believed her at first. She was convincing, gentle, polite, and careful with her words. But the more they spent time together, the more he began to see small cracks in her story. One afternoon, he offered to drop her at home after a date. Zainab panicked. Her real home was in a poor area, and she couldn't let him see that. "No, don't worry," she said quickly. "My friend is picking me up." Femi hesitated but didn't push. As he drove away, Zainab's heart pounded. She felt safe for the moment, but she knew she couldn't hide the truth forever. At night, she sat on her bed, counting the money she owed. Her mother had noticed her fine clothes and expensive perfume but didn't say much. One evening, Mama Aisha asked gently, "My child, how do you pay for all these things?" Zainab looked away. "I'm doing fine, Mama. Don't worry about me." But her mother's eyes were full of worry. "Lies don't feed the soul, Zainab," she said quietly. "Be careful." Femi began to ask more questions. He wanted to know about her family, her work, her past. Zainab always had an answer, but her words didn't always match. Once, she said her father was in Ghana, and another time she said he was in London. Femi noticed, but he didn't confront her. Instead, he watched her quietly, trying to understand the truth. Zainab was trapped between two worlds, the life she had and the life she wanted. Each morning, she dressed up and looked at herself in the mirror, whispering, "You're almost there. Just a little longer." But deep inside, she knew she was building her dream on weak ground. The more she tried to look rich, the more empty she felt. Her debts grew worse. The people she borrowed from began to call, demanding payment. She begged them to wait, promising she would pay soon. But the calls kept coming. She started avoiding them, switching off her phone for hours. When Femi noticed her mood, he asked, "Is everything okay?" She smiled and said, "Yes, I'm just tired." He didn't believe her. One day, Femi suggested they visit her parents. "I want to greet your family," he said kindly. Zainab froze. "They're not around," she lied quickly. "They traveled." Femi nodded slowly, saying nothing more, but his mind was full of doubt. Later that night, Zainab sat alone in her small room. The walls felt like they were closing in. She thought about all the lies she had told, about her father, her home, her work. She knew it couldn't last forever, but she didn't know how to stop. She wanted to tell Femi the truth, but she feared losing him. She whispered to herself, "If he loves me, he'll forgive me. But if I tell him now, he'll leave." The next weekend, Femi invited her to a private dinner at his home. He looked serious that evening. After they ate, he said softly, "Zainab, there's something I need to ask you. Please don't be angry." She tried to smile. "What is it?" He looked into her eyes and asked, "Why do you always avoid talking about your family? And why do you seem afraid of being seen in certain places?" Her heart started beating fast. She laughed nervously. "No reason," she said. "You're just imagining things." But Femi didn't smile. "I like you, Zainab. But sometimes I feel like you're hiding something from me. I don't care if you come from a rich or poor family. I just want the truth." Zainab looked down at her hands. For a moment, she wanted to confess everything. She wanted to tell him about the debts, the lies, and the fear that haunted her. But pride stopped her. She lifted her chin and said softly, "There's nothing to hide, Femi. I'm just a private person." He nodded, though his eyes showed sadness. When she went home that night, she cried quietly. She knew she was losing his trust, and soon she might lose him completely. But she couldn't stop pretending. It was too late to turn back. The image she created had become her prison. The following week, things grew worse. The people she owed began visiting her home, shouting and threatening her. Her neighbors watched and whispered. Zainab begged them to leave, promising to pay soon. Her mother came running from the market, her face pale. "Zainab," she cried, "what is happening?" But Zainab had no words. She sat down, covering her face with her hands. Tears rolled down her cheeks. The dream she had worked so hard to build was falling apart. She wanted to call Femi for help, but shame held her back. How could she tell the man she wanted to impress that everything about her was a lie? As night fell, she sat by the window, staring into the darkness. Her phone buzzed. It was Femi's message. "I care about you, Zainab. But I need honesty more than beauty." She dropped the phone and began to sob. She finally understood that no amount of makeup or fancy clothes could hide the truth forever. The image she fought so hard to protect was the same thing destroying her from the inside. The afternoon was bright and quiet when Femi sat in his office, going through a pile of papers. He was in a good mood, thinking about Zainab and how she always brought warmth into his days, even when work was stressful. But that peace did not last long. Suddenly, his secretary rushed in, her face pale. "Sir," she said nervously, "there are 2 men outside asking to see you. They say it's urgent." Femi frowned. "Who are they?" he asked. "They didn't say, sir," she replied. "But they mentioned a woman named Zainab." Femi was surprised, but told her to let them in. A moment later, 2 rough-looking men entered the office. They bowed slightly but did not smile. One of them, a tall man with a scar on his face, spoke first. "Good afternoon, sir. We are here about a lady named Zainab." Femi's heart began to race. "What about her?" he asked. The man pulled out a small notebook and said, "She owes us money. A lot of money. She said you would help her pay." Femi's face changed. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Zainab," he repeated softly, as if the name itself hurt. "There must be a mistake." The man shook his head. "No mistake, sir. She has borrowed from many people. We have been looking for her for weeks. Someone told us she works with you, so we came." Femi felt anger rising in his chest, but beneath the anger was something worse, disappointment. He stood up slowly and said, "You can go now. I will handle it." The men nodded and left quietly. He stood by the window, staring at the city below, his mind full of questions. Could it be true? Was Zainab living a lie all this time? He felt a heaviness in his heart that he could not explain. When Zainab arrived at his house that evening, she was smiling as usual, wearing one of her elegant dresses. "You look tired," she said softly. But Femi did not smile. He sat on the sofa, silent. "Zainab," he said finally, "I had visitors today. 2 men came to my office asking for you." Her smile faded. "Visitors?" she asked quietly, pretending not to understand. "Yes," he said. "They said you owe them money. They said you borrowed from many people." Zainab froze. Her hands began to shake. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Femi's eyes were calm, but there was pain in them. "Tell me, Zainab," he said gently, "is it true?" She wanted to deny it, but the truth was too heavy to hide. Tears filled her eyes as she sank into the chair. "I didn't mean to lie," she whispered. "I just wanted to look good for you. I didn't want you to see where I came from. I didn't want to lose you." Femi looked down. "So you thought lying would help?" She covered her face with her hands. "I was scared. I wanted to be your wife. I wanted to live a better life. I didn't want to be poor anymore." Femi stood up slowly. He walked to the window and stared outside for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Zainab, I loved you for who you were, not for what you wore. But now I don't even know who you are." She cried harder. "Please, Femi, forgive me. I'll pay them back. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." He turned to her, his eyes sad but firm. "You chased wealth, Zainab, but you forgot that truth is richer than gold. You could have had my heart, but instead, you tried to buy my world." His words hit her like stones. She tried to speak, but he was already walking away. "Femi, please," she called out, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." He stopped at the door and turned one last time. "Sometimes," he said softly, "we destroy the very thing we want most by pretending to be what we are not." Then he left. Zainab stood there, her legs weak, her eyes full of tears. She fell to the floor, her body shaking. For the first time, she felt the true weight of her choices. The fine dress she wore suddenly felt heavy, like a chain around her neck. The room seemed too quiet, too empty. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked around her small room, thinking about every lie, every moment she could have told the truth. Her phone kept ringing, the moneylenders again, but she didn't answer. She just sat in the dark, crying. The next morning, she went to Femi's office to beg for forgiveness, but the receptionist told her he wasn't available. She waited outside for hours, hoping he would come out. When he finally did, he walked past her without a word. His silence was louder than any shout could be. Zainab felt her heart break in pieces. She wanted to run after him, but her legs refused to move. People passed by, staring at her tear-streaked face, but she didn't care. Her dream was gone. When she returned home, her mother was waiting. "Zainab," Mama Aisha said softly, "what happened?" Zainab fell into her arms, crying like a child. "I lost everything, Mama. I lost him." Her mother held her close and whispered, "My daughter, what you build with lies will always fall. But you are still alive. You can start again." Zainab nodded weakly. She had no strength left, but she knew her mother was right. The road ahead would be hard, but at least it would be real. Days turned into weeks, and Zainab began to see how deep her mistakes had been. She sold her fancy clothes to pay part of her debts. She worked long hours at a small restaurant, washing dishes and saving every coin she earned. People whispered when they saw her, but she ignored them. She no longer cared what anyone thought. Sometimes, she passed by Femi's office and saw him from a distance. He looked busy, focused, and strong. She wished she could go back and change everything, but she knew it was too late. The love she destroyed could never be rebuilt. Still, she held on to one thing, the lesson he taught her. Truth is richer than gold. Those words stayed in her heart, guiding her through each difficult day. And though the pain of losing him stayed for a long time, Zainab slowly began to heal. She learned that pretending to be someone else could bring attention, but only honesty could bring peace. When Zainab returned home, her life was in pieces. Her dreams had fallen apart, and her heart was broken beyond words. She no longer had the fancy clothes, the shiny shoes, or the expensive perfumes that once made her feel powerful. All she had left was a small bag of old clothes and a heart full of regret. Her mother, Mama Aisha, welcomed her with open arms. "My daughter," she said softly, "the world has broken you, but you are still here. You can start again." Zainab cried in her mother's lap for days, unable to face the shame of what she had done. She had lied, borrowed, and lost everything, even love. The neighbors whispered when she passed. Some mocked her, saying, "So this is the millionaire's wife?" Others pitied her. But Zainab no longer responded to gossip. Her pride had melted away, and all she wanted now was peace. At first, life was hard. She had no job, no money, and no confidence. Every morning, she sat by the window watching people go to work. She wished she could go back to the days when she was full of hope, before greed had blinded her. One morning, her mother said gently, "Zainab, crying will not change your life. You must stand up. You are not a failure. You only lost your way." Those words stayed in Zainab's heart. The next day, she took her mother's old sewing machine from the corner of the room. It was rusty and made strange noises, but it still worked. She had learned a bit of sewing when she was younger, though she never took it seriously. Now, it was her only chance to start again. Her hands trembled as she threaded the needle. The first few dresses she made were crooked, and no one wanted to buy them. But she didn't give up. She worked from morning till night, sometimes sewing by candlelight when the power went out. After a few weeks, a neighbor came to her small home with a torn dress. "Can you fix this for me?" the woman asked. Zainab nodded quickly. She worked on the dress all night, sewing it neatly and adding a small decorative pattern at the edge. When the woman came back the next morning, she gasped in surprise. "This is beautiful. You have magic in your hands." That small job gave Zainab hope. The woman told her friends, and soon more people started coming. Some wanted dresses for weddings, others for special occasions. Zainab began earning a little money. She saved every naira she could, promising herself that she would never borrow again. Months passed, and her sewing skills improved. She bought a new sewing machine, then another. She started designing her own styles, bright colors, soft fabrics, and elegant cuts that made women feel confident. Her work became popular in the area. People started calling her Madam Zainab the tailor. One day, a young girl came to her shop and said, "Auntie Zainab, I want to learn how to sew like you." Zainab smiled warmly. "Come, my dear. I will teach you." Slowly, her small shop turned into a training place for other women who wanted to learn. Years went by, and Zainab became known not just in her neighborhood but across the town. Her designs were displayed at fashion shows, and she was invited to speak at women's events. Every time she stood before a crowd, she remembered the girl who once lied to impress a man. The pain was still somewhere inside her, but it no longer controlled her. She had rebuilt her life with her own 2 hands. One afternoon, after a long day at work, she sat outside her shop watching the sunset. A woman passing by greeted her, "Madam Zainab, I heard you used to live in Lagos. You must have had an exciting life there." Zainab smiled softly. "Yes, I did," she said. "I learned some hard lessons there." The woman looked curious. "What kind of lessons?" Zainab laughed gently. "All my effort to be a millionaire's wife came crashing down because I forgot to be a woman of worth." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes full of admiration. That night, Zainab sat with her mother on the porch. The air was cool, and the stars shone brightly above. "Mama," she said quietly, "do you think Femi ever thinks of me?" Her mother smiled kindly. "Maybe he does. But what matters is what you think of yourself now." Zainab sighed. "I used to think happiness came from being rich. But now I see that peace comes from doing honest work and being true to yourself." Her mother reached out and held her hand. "And that, my daughter, is real wealth." Years later, Zainab opened a bigger shop and named it House of Worth. She decorated it with simple fabrics and colorful African prints. Women from all over came to buy her designs and to learn from her. She became a mentor to young girls, teaching them not only how to sew but how to live with dignity. She often told her students, "Don't chase money through lies. Build yourself with truth and hard work. That is how real success begins." One day, as she was teaching a group of girls how to cut fabric, a man walked into her shop. When she looked up, her heart skipped a beat. It was Femi. He looked older, calmer, but still carried the same quiet strength she remembered. "Zainab," he said softly, "I heard about what you've become. I wanted to see it with my own eyes." She smiled politely. "You're welcome, Femi. Life has been kind to me." He nodded. "I can see that. You found your own way." "Yes," she replied. "It took me a while, but I learned that the only wealth that lasts is the one you build with your own hands." There was silence for a moment. Then Femi smiled. "I'm proud of you." Zainab's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said. "I'm proud of me too." He left quietly, and Zainab stood there for a long time, watching him go. There were no tears, no pain, only peace. That evening, as she closed her shop, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I lost love once, but I found something greater, myself." And from that day on, every dress she made carried a little part of her story, a story of failure, forgiveness, and rebirth. Whenever young women came to her seeking advice, she would smile and say, "Don't dream of being a millionaire's wife. Dream of being a woman of worth." And those words became her legacy, a truth born from her pain, carried in every stitch, every fabric, and every heart she touched.